The movie begins in a dimly lit room where Evan is sitting in front of his mother, who is slowly dying from cancer. After sleeping for a few hours, his sickly mother wakes up and begins to look at her sad son lovingly, telling him that she loves him, feeling like she should lighten the saddened mood. Evan's ill mother tells him a joke, but he doesn't seem to be listening to her as he is too worried. A few minutes later, the sick woman takes a long breath and passes away. After the funeral takes place, Evan decides to go out for drinks with his friend Mike to make himself feel better. The two head over to the restaurant where they work, and Mike offers to buy his friend some drinks. Suddenly, Evan decides to go to the bathroom but accidentally begins a fight with a customer and severely beats him up, unleashing all the frustration he had about losing his mother. Seeing his unprecedented actions, Evan's boss fires him, asking him to leave the bar. After the upsetting incident, Mike and Evan head over to his house and continue drinking while sitting on the porch. Mike suggests that Evan needs a change in his surroundings so he can get his life back together. After a very drunk Mike leaves, Evan's girlfriend, Gail, comes over to his house and the two begin to spend a passionate time together. Out of nowhere, Gail pulls back and expresses that she doesn't want to continue her relationship with Evan. Expressing that she cares about him, Gail suggests that he get out of the city, mentioning how her brother's trip to India had given him a better perspective on his life. After a few minutes of conversation, Evan decides to go to sleep and Gail quietly lays down next to him. The following day, Evan decides to take Mike and Gail's advice to heart and book a spontaneous trip to Italy. When he arrives, he finds the place fascinating as he visits different places and enjoys the beautiful scenery. That evening, Evan goes to a local bar and joins a group of British tourists who invite him to join them. After having a long conversation with the men, the group invites Evan to go to the coast with them, which he graciously accepts. The next morning, Evan heads out with the group he had met the previous night and enjoys himself on the car ride to the coast. The group takes turns driving the car while some of them rest, sharing personal moments with one of the men who shares his stories about his ex. Once they arrive at the small rural town, the group takes a few hours to rest up and head out for a drink while enjoying the beautiful scenery. As the men laugh and talk, Evan suddenly notices a gorgeous woman in a red dress standing by the bar and decides to go over to talk to her. After telling his friends that he was going to get the next round, Evan approaches the beautiful woman and begins to flirt with her, asking her if he could buy her a drink. Without wasting any time, the woman who had introduced herself as Louise and asked him to come home with her for a night of passion. Suspicious of the sudden offer, which made Evan think she might be a prostitute or involved in some type of criminal activity, Evan attempts to offer to spend some time with her before they could be alone together. Looking at him sarcastically, Louise refuses the offer and walks away, leaving him to drink alone with his friends. The following morning, Evan wakes up having had a horrible hangover from the night of drinking. When he looks around, he sees his new friends getting ready to leave, but decides he is going to stay there for a while. Once they leave, Evan begins to search for a temporary job and finds some work on a nearby farm. Approaching the farm owner, Angelo, Evan speaks to him about his situation and manages to convince the old man to hire him. Taking him inside his house, Angelo prepares a drink for them, while Evan asks about the pictures on the wall, which the old man explains was his dead wife, who had passed away in a car accident. Later that day, Evan decides to go out for a walk to explore more of the town and is shocked when he sees Louise pass him by on the street. Happy that he might have gotten a second chance, he follows her and asks her for another date, but Louise expresses that she is not interested. Deciding not to quit, Evan follows her into a museum and asks her a bunch of questions about the art inside, finding out that she is a student who is learning evolutionary genetics at the local university. As they look around, she shows him an ancient art piece where a woman is painted who has different eye colors and asks him what he thinks of the painting. Looking at it attentively, Evan expresses that he finds the image attractive. Later that evening, Evan and the beautiful Louise have a bottle of wine at a nearby cafe and share a bit about their lives. After they're done with their drinks, Louise decides to take Evan to her favorite place, which is a bridge that oversees the waves crashing onto a nearby cliff. She tells him that she was interested in the caves underneath, which are said to be haunted by dead sailors. After having a romantic evening and becoming a bit drunk from the wine, Evan and Louise head back to his house and spend a passionate night together. During the night, Evan attempts to wear protection, but Louise throws it away. Once they're done and fast asleep, a dim light in the room shows Louise transformed into some type of gray monster with claws and sharp teeth. Staggering out of bed, Louise quickly leaves the house, leaning on the outside walls for support, and disappears into the night. The following morning, Evan wakes up and realizes Louise had left him alone, but he doesn't think much of it, jumping right into his chores on the farm. Meanwhile, Louise is in her apartment staring at herself in the mirror and putting in contact lenses into her eyes, which seem to be two different colors. While moving around, she accidentally exposes her hand to sunlight, which immediately burns her, forcing her to pull it back. She then grabs a syringe syringe with her medication and injects herself as if she had done this multiple times before. After a day of hard work, Evan goes out into town and accidentally runs into Louise, who playfully pretends like they have never met before. She reveals she was only joking. The two spend the rest of the day together, and Louise takes Evan to her apartment, where he meets her pet rabbit. After accidentally seeing the different types of music she listened to, Evan asks Louise how many languages she spoke and is surprised by the long list. Getting comfortable on the sofa beside Evan, Louise begins to smoke the cigarette she had taken from Evan when she suddenly notices the transformation of the skin on her leg. Telling Evan she would be back soon, Louise hurries to the bathroom, where she undergoes a frightening transformation into an unnoticeable creature before returning to herself. Taking deep breaths, she looks at the bathroom, which is covered in blood and gooey substance, and quickly cleans it up, getting dressed so Evan doesn't suspect anything. The following morning, Evan wakes up early to return to the farm to help Angelo with his workload. After another long day of work, he heads out to meet Louise for dinner and attempts to take a picture of her, but she refuses. The only one he managed to make seem deformed. Attempting to steer the conversation away from the picture, Louise begins to ask him questions about his family and becomes angry when he only gives her vague answers. When she walks over to the beach, Evan follows her there and explains the reason he was keeping information about his family from her was because they had all passed away. He then proceeds to ask her to tell him something personal about herself, and she reveals her secret about her two different colored eyes, showing him by taking out her contacts. The following day, both Evan and Louise had gone to their respective jobs, Louise working in a small local clinic. While taking a swab from a patient, the man asks Louise what the horrible smell in the room is, but she brushes away the question. Once the man had left, she took a look at her body and realized that another transformation had begun, putting her in a strange spot as she didn't have any of her medication left. Having no other choice, Louise hurries to the nearby caves and performs a ritual where she is forced to eat her pet rabbit, which helps her get control of her form again. After returning home from her exhausting transformation, Louise meets Evan in her apartment, and he takes her of her, assuming that she is simply a bit ill. After a simple workday, Evan takes most of the afternoon off to go to an art gallery and purchase an artistic book about the information Louise had been telling him the day they met at the museum. When he presents her with the book, Louise is touched and takes him on a boat ride to the beautiful caves, where they spend a romantic evening. Once they return to land, they decide to have dinner, but Louise's unexpected transformation hits her once again, giving Evan a reason for needing to go to the clinic early the following day. Louise rushes home, stumbling as she feels the pain of the transformation. Unable to make it home, Louise hides at a nearby ally where she unexpectedly encounters a drunk American tourist who attempts to assault her, unaware of what he is getting himself into. Turning around fully transformed, Louise attacks the tourist and kills him by ripping him apart. After the gruesome night, the body of the tourist was found slumped over on the stones near the caves. Worried about Louise, Evan goes over to her apartment to check on her well-being and finds her looking very sickly. While he is taking care of her, Louise tells him that she is not willing to see him anymore, but refuses to give him a reason. Shocked by what she has just said, Evan confesses that he was in love with her, but Louise refuses to accommodate his feelings and asks him to leave. Saddened by what had just happened, Evan goes to a nearby bar and begins to drink. When he finally feels the alcohol working, he decides to return to Louise's house to convince her to continue to date him. When he arrives at her house and opens the door, Evan is shocked to see her in a completely transformed state where she looks like a frightening monster, attempting to reach for her medication. Although he is shocked by what he has just seen, he quickly heads over and helps her with the injection, watching as she reverts to human. After the frightening moment, the two calm themselves down by sitting at the dining table before Evan begins to ask for explanations. When she refuses to tell him anything, Evan barges out of the house, but she quickly follows him, telling him about who she is by showing him the ancient painting of the woman with two colored eyes. Louise explains that every 20 years she impregnates herself and uses the child in her body to recreate herself with 50% new DNA, changing into different creatures in the process, which takes a week. She explains that she had to break up with him because she would change into a different person and he wouldn't recognize her. After taking some time to himself, Evan returns and tells her that he wants to make it work, even though the person she would change into would technically be related to him. Although she tells him she isn't in love with him and she wouldn't choose mortality to be with him, Evan convinces her to spend the day with him until her transformation. Once Louise agrees, the two drive to the coast and spend the morning on the beaches. During their time together, Louise reveals all the knowledge she has accumulated throughout the years. Taking him to the museum, she shows him more of her ancient paintings that had been drawn throughout the years. Realizing that she is truly in love with Louise, Evan begs her to stay with him, but she explains that she has no control control over what her body decides to do, telling him that only true love would allow her to keep her form due to a chemical known as oxytocin, which was naturally released in the body. When the time for her transformation arrives, Louise takes him to the ruins of Pompeii, explaining that she was born and raised there, as she points out everything she remembers about the place. Once they chose a rock to sit at, Louise warns him to get away from her once the transformation begins, as this would be the deadliest of them all. While he holds her head, he feels her skin begin to transform and turn leathery, slowly laying her down on his lap. Evan patiently waits until dawn, watching the scenery in front of them. When he finally looks at Louise, he finds that she is looking the same as she did before, which means she was really in love with him and the transformation had stopped. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.